Welcome to T21Mom.
Hi, friends. It's your friend Mary. Welcome back to the T21Mom podcast. This is episode 146. And today we're diving into another powerful and heartfelt diagnosis story. I'm chatting with the lovely Cathy Middlestetter, whose daughter Cathy is now 27 years old and has Down syndrome. Cathy received Cassie's diagnosis just 11 days before she was born. Can you imagine? 11 days to prepare for a life-changing journey. But Cathy met that moment with strength. And back then, there was no Facebook, no Instagram, no online support groups. Still, just 5 weeks after Cassie's birth, she found another mom who truly understood. Because sometimes we just need one person to walk the path with us. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let's listen to Cathy's story. One of courage, connection, and the start of an unexpected but beautiful adventure. Welcome back to the T21Mom podcast. Today, we're diving into another powerful diagnosis story, and I'm very excited to introduce my guest, Cathy Middlestetter. Cathy, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, you're very welcome. Now, we were just chatting before we started to record, and, obviously you had been listening to the podcast and you reached out because you wanted to share your journey with your daughter, Cassie Joy, who obviously has Down syndrome. And you told me she just celebrated her 27th birthday?
27. That's right.
27. Wow. And I'm really excited to share this opportunity to hear your story firsthand. But before we get into it, can you start by telling us a little bit about you and your family?
Okay. I am the oldest of 4 kids. My dad is a retired pastor. My mom has been gone now for 3 years. She was a nurse. So I had that help from her and, of course, my dad's support as well. And then I am a dental hygienist. So I know some things about teeth, and that's kind of a fun career. I taught at the local college for about 15 years, but then mom got sick and her cancer took priority. So I took a break from that. I do practice 1 day a week in the dental field, but then I have other hats that I wear. I take care of a lady with rheumatoid arthritis. I also help my dad. These are some things that I do on the side, but my greatest pleasure in my job that I have is Grammy. I get to be grandma to 5 little ones, and I enjoy that very much. We have 4 kids. The first 3 are boys, and they are, 36, 35, and 28. They are all married. I have the best 3 daughter-in-laws ever. And again, the 5 grandchildren. So Cassie has a lot of people that love her and that are here to support her whenever is time, that is needed. So they step in when I need them.
Oh, that's wonderful. And lots of little grandkids running around. So life is obviously very busy. That's great.
Yes, it is.
And so finding out, because you found out ahead of time that you were having a girl. So that must have been exciting, especially after having 3 boys. And you had mentioned that you had declined further testing during your pregnancy. Can you tell me a little bit more about that decision? Was it suggested by your doctor, or how did you weigh your options, or was there a reason like it was even brought up?
Well, back 37 years ago, if we go back to my oldest, Charles, when he was born, I just automatically did this serum testing. I think it was around week 15. And I went home, I talked to my mom about it. And she just said, oh, well, Cathy, that test is to check to see if there's any genetic abnormalities. She said, you can, if you choose to. And she didn't say anything like I needed to or anything, but she said that is an optional test. And you could, if you decided to, not have that test. And I said, well, I really don't think I need it, because I knew going in that I am pro-life. I really feel strongly that there is no accidental children. So no matter what, I was going to have Cassie. I was not going to opt out and terminate. So after Charles was born, and then the other 3 were born after that, I decided not to. So he didn't really suggest me having it. As I remember for Cassie, I was 34 when I had Cassie. And so, yeah, they may have, I just don't remember. But I did make it very clear early on, so I'm sure it was in my chart, that that was not an option for me. So that's kind of the short answer, the long answer, if that makes more sense.
So, and when you're saying serum test, because I've never heard that term before, is that different than an amnu?
Yes. It's some type of a blood test. Boy, this is going back far in my memory. I actually Googled it this morning. What test was available back in the late 90s, early 90s, and late 80s? And that's what came up. It said something
Okay.
about a maternal serum test. Now, it was not 100%. So it could come out positive that there was some concern in that area and then be completely wrong. And the other could also be true. They could say, oh, there's nothing, we don't see any red flags. Everything looks fine. And then there could be a red flag later. So it wasn't 100%, but it's what they had then, is my understanding.
That's very interesting because that's very similar sounding to what the NIPT test is now, which is just a blood
Non-invasive.
test. Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay,
Yes.
that's very interesting because I hadn't heard that before. So I might do some Googling after we finish to learn a bit more about it. So you had also mentioned that when you were pregnant with Cassie, she didn't move a lot while you were pregnant, which
Right.
obviously would raise some concerns. How did the doctors react to that? Did they investigate further, or did they just reassure you at the time? Or because obviously you'd been pregnant 3 times prior, you
Right.
kind of knew what it should be like.
I sure did. And they were all 3 boys.
Yeah.
So, and I felt them very early. I used to say they were, picking footballs around in there already. So they were very active. So when she was not active, that was a red flag for me. And at 20 weeks, I went in mainly to find out, was I having a boy or a girl? But I remember distinctly walking into that appointment, and the tech was there. And I remember telling her, please, I want you to look at the brain and the heart. I said, I'm not feeling him or her move yet, and I'm concerned. And all I remember, I don't really remember a doctor talking to me at that time. I just remember at the end of that appointment, my mind was at ease. I remember being confident I was having a girl. Congratulations. And I left happy. And that is actually the way I preferred to leave. Finding out that early, I think it would have maybe spiraled me downward. And I was happy to have those 15 weeks until I went into labor at 35 weeks. I was happier to have that feeling rather than, oh, something's wrong. We're so sorry, something's wrong. So I just went about the next 15 weeks just saying, well, it's a girl and she's different than her brothers. That's all I knew. And that satisfied me at that time.
So as you mentioned, you went into labor at 35 weeks. It was a little early. So what kind of happened at this point? Was the early delivery expected, or did it take you by surprise? Were your other boys, were they full term?
They were all 3 full term. And while I had complications, with each of them, my first one I tried to labor and couldn't, 2 hours of pushing, they came in and said, we're sorry, we're either going to have to do high forceps or cesarean. I opted for cesarean. Then I had a fever, couldn't hold him for 2 days. Second one came along. He was already 1.5 pounds bigger than the first. They suggested cesarean. I took it. However, a nerve was hit. And I remember not being able to touch my left leg the next day. It was awful. And little Caleb's blood sugar dropped really low. So he was in an ICU for 24 hours. Then Colin was an emergency cesarean.
Oh, geez.
So I tried this. I know. I tried to be back. But all 3, thankfully, were full term. Cassie was the earliest, of course. And the reason they say, when I went in for that 35 weeks, because I went into labor early. I was with a patient that morning. I was cleaning his teeth, and I said, "I'm sorry, but I have to go I have to leave." So we sat down, and I drove myself
my
to
gosh.
the hospital. And then they said, "Okay, let's do an ultrasound." And I told them when I went in, I said, what I didn't know then was that I was measuring already full term, if not even more so than full term, because she had what's called a double bubble in her belly. Have you heard of that yet? There was bowel backing up in her belly, which no one knew. And so she was able, my amniotic fluid was like 3 times more than it should have been. So that's why I was measuring extra large. And so I told the lady this time, I said, "Now I can't lay on my back very long. Please don't make me lay on my back very long. I feel like I could faint or lose consciousness." She said, "Okay, okay." But she had me back there 20 minutes. I was watching the clock, and I didn't know it then, but she was like following the hands and feet around. She was trying to see that division in the toes. She was looking for the signs. She knew. She knew. And that's what she was trying to get evidence for at that time. That's what I believe.
Okay.
So I got dressed. I came out of the room, and I saw 3 people standing by the front desk. There were maybe a front desk person and a couple nurses. I don't know now, but all 3 of them were looking at me like the most pathetic look ever. And I thought, really? Why are you looking at me like that? And then I went into a room and sat down, and the doctor came in. He drew on a piece of paper what a double bubble was and said the day of birth, daughter is going to have surgery. There's blockage in her GI. And I thought, okay, I think I probably started to cry. But he said, now in 20 to 40% of the cases, this could be Down syndrome. Do you want to know if it is or is not before she arrives? And I almost immediately said, yes, I really would like to know. I need to prepare. And at least I thought I needed to prepare. And we talked earlier about reading the book, Babies with Down Syndrome. It's what was out at the time. And I devoured that book. I needed to know as much as I could. I studied up and I learned as much as I could. But he said then, well, it has to be done with an amnio. First of all, we'll get you in and drain some of this water off of you so you're more comfortable, not realizing that 3 days later it would be back because the water happens very quickly. But the other thing, we're going to get some cells while we're there. We're going to find out, are her lungs developing on target? And then we're going to find out, does she have the cells of a Down syndrome person? So I said, okay. So within a day or 2, I was in there. I was in there with the amnio. They drained 700 to 800 cc's, I believe, off of me so that I could be more comfortable. I remember them saying, now we're going to take as much as we can. You tell us when to stop because it's going to start to hurt. And I took as much as I could. And I said, I can't take any more. And they stopped. And then they said, now we're going to call you. There's a quick test and then a slow test. The slow one will take 5 days or so, but the quick one, we can kind of know something within 48 hours.
Wow.
Would that be all right? And I know. And so I said, yes, we would like to know sooner rather than later. And so I don't know if I'm getting in too much into this question or not, but it was a Sunday afternoon when they called. And I personally felt that finding out over the phone was a very impersonal and cold way to find out. But my husband was willing to take that call. So he did. And they called. And I had already in my mind had decided this is probably Down syndrome. I had somewhat accepted it. I knew that she wasn't active like the boys. I knew something was different. So this had kind of already happened in my thought, in my thought process. But Chuck had been more like, oh, we're going to be positive. We're going to think positively. And he didn't go there. He didn't let himself go there. So that was the day he did. He heard it in real time. And when he hung up, he lost it. Now, I think I cried with him and we hugged each other, but I think I was more sad for him because I had pretty much decided that it was what it was and just accept it. And so years later, this is interesting, Mary, years later, all of these years, I thought that he was crying because we were having a child that was different and that was going to need lots more help. And that was, and he tells me now that just a few years ago, I think it was, that's not the case at all. That he was more sad for her and what she was going to have to go through that it was going to be more of a challenge for her at school, that it was going to be more of a challenge for her to walk, to learn, all of it. And so anyway, that was interesting I don't know why it took me so long to ask him. But
That's so interesting because that was sort of because you found out 11 days. You had 11 days from the time that you found out till when she was born. So,
yes.
and like you said, you found that book, Babies with Down Syndrome. I read that book too. I think that was one of the first books I read too.
Right.
And so did you end up having to have another C-section with her?
Yep, they scheduled it. They scheduled it 37 weeks. So I counted at the time I said 11 days, that's what my memory says now as well. It was 11 days that I was able to prepare. So at 37 weeks, they scheduled it and I had a cesarean. And that was a very special time because with the boys, none of them, but the reasons I said before, the nurse did not bring them over to me and put them here on my shoulder and let me snuggle while they were sewing me up. It didn't happen. And so I had felt I had really missed out on that.
Yeah.
But with Cathy, they did. They brought her right up to me and I would snuggle her and kiss on her. And it was very special because they knew and I knew they were going to have to whisk her away to Children's within the next hour.
Right.
Without that surgery, she would not have been able to eat. And I guess with our kids, sometimes there are GI issues where there's blockage, either upper or lower. It can be all over. A lot of different stories there. But it was really neat because they brought the little warming bed over, and it was the one they were going to transport her in. So it had a ceiling, it had sides, it had the whole deal. And they had her in there, and they had one of the sides lowered so that I could reach over and touch her. And I remember this is the only time I had with her until I was released 3 days later, but I tickled her hand, and the neatest thing happened. She opened her hand wider and reached for me and then let me caress her little hand. And that's my best memory from all of that, is that she knew I was there and she wanted more caressing, and it was very sweet. Very sweet.
I can just visualize that. That's what a beautiful moment because, a lot of whirlwind in those 11 days. Now,
so much.
you mentioned that you're like I got my diagnosis over the phone as well, like you. And I don't know if I would have preferred it to be in an office because I think I would have known anyways what it was going to be. But your husband is the one who took that phone call. How do you think your husband processed it? Like you said, he's sort of crying after, because I've heard from a lot of moms that the experience is often different for the dads once they receive the diagnosis, either prenatally or at birth. And I think a lot of it is because we've carried the baby. You didn't necessarily feel her a lot, but usually you can feel the baby, you're growing. Was that the case for you and your husband?
Well, I don't know exactly. I think we just at the moment when the news happened and we hung up, he hung up the phone and just burst into tears. I was in shock, I think, from him. I'd never seen him cry like that. And so I all these years thought, how is he processing it? Maybe that he, the child we thought we were having, we're not having now. But we didn't really talk much, Mary. It's sad. We've never been very good at talking about our feelings sometimes. I'm a little better than he, but I can remember being a lot more talkative about my feelings than he was about his. So unfortunately, other than knowing now, looking back on it, that he was more fearful for her at the time. Otherwise, I don't know a good answer for that, how he processed it. But I just know that it was very, very difficult on him.
Well, I think getting the diagnosis, because it's unexpected, right? Regardless of when you get it.
Yeah.
But I mean, 11 days is such a short time to process such life-changing news.
Right.
I mean, you sort of touched on it, like what steps did you take to prepare emotionally and practically in those last few days before Cassie arrived? I mean, you read the book, you said, from cover to cover,
Yes.
but what
Yes.
else did you and your husband do?
Well, I don't remember talking to my pastor, but I do remember talking to my parents.
Mhm.
And they were there to be a support for me, for us. I can remember my church family being there as well. So as
Mhm.
far as I just remember having support from people that love us, that everything was going to be fine.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't know if I answered the question very well, but
No, you
that's
did.
what I'm thinking. That's how I felt at the time.
Yeah. No, it's because sometimes it can be, whether it was 27 years ago or 3 years ago, it can still be a bit of a blur, right? Because there's
Yes, so
just,
many memories are a blur, and yet some are as vivid, like
Mhm.
those three ladies standing outside the
Mhm.
door are as vivid as they were yesterday almost.
Yeah.
It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Because, I can totally remember the moment I found out. Like, I remember everything that was going on.
Yeah.
And, and that was 13 years ago. And I'm sure, like you said, it's like it was yesterday. You can still visualize it like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Cassie's just turned 27, way before the time of any kind of social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever.
Right.
What it must have been like incredibly isolating. I can't imagine because, now like there's so much out there. How did you cope? Like, did you find support in your local community or through other means, or like,
Yes.
how did you do it?
Thankfully, the main one that sticks out to my memory, and Maria and I were very close because of this, but the hospital said when Cassie turned 5 weeks old, the hospital reached out to me and said that another baby had been born, similar to Cassie, also a girl, and her name is Rachel. But they didn't tell me that then. They just asked me, would it be possible for us to connect you with that mom? And I said, absolutely. I give me that. Yeah, I need it. I need it. Even if she doesn't, I need it.
Yeah.
So they connected us. And then Maria and I became friends right off the bat. She was a military mom,
Mhm.
wife. And so they are in Alaska now, and we still keep track of each other on Facebook. But we had each other over. We cooked for each other. We went out to McDonald's. I remember the ball pit. I remember our girls playing together on the floor. We have some pictures of that. But yeah, we needed each other, and this is what I'm going through. What are you going through? With walking and all of it. So little Rachel, she even skis now.
Wow.
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cassie's nonverbal, and sometimes I wish that because when she was about 10, I may have mentioned this. She
Mhm.
was about 10. I remember asking the PT or whoever was with her at the time. I said, "Do you think she's on the spectrum? She seems like she's repetitive, like she could have some form of autism." And at the time they said, "No, no." But then a couple years later, I asked again, and I wish I had really pressed because years later they said, there are some signs that she could be on the spectrum. And yeah, so sometimes I wish that I had. I don't know what to do about it now because she's 27,
Mhm.
but yeah, she's nonverbal, and sometimes it's hard for her to explain what's going on. Like the other day, she had a fever, couldn't understand it, but she came to me and she was pointing to her belly, and so I knew she must have a bellyache. But to figure it out is
Mhm.
it's a process.
Right.
Process.
Well, don't beat yourself up so hard because it's not
Yeah,
even that long ago that they even felt that you could have two conditions could coexist, which I find mind blowing that they didn't think you could have Down syndrome and autism. Like, I go, how could they think that's not possible? But it wasn't even, I don't know exactly when, but it's not
I
really
see.
that long ago that they realized, yes, you could have more than one condition. You could have multiple. So,
Right.
and that's probably why a lot of them were saying no, because at
I
that
see.
time they felt they couldn't. But,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's fairly high in our community. It's around 18% of our kids do have the dual diagnosis, like my daughter. And it comes with its own unique set of challenges, as I'm sure you're finding with
Right.
Cassie. It doesn't change who they are, but it's just another layer to who
Yeah.
they are. Yeah.
Got some little bracelet making stuff for Christmas, and she tried her best, to make bracelets with the little beads and all that.
Mhm.
She got them all made within a week, Mary. She made
Wow.
them all in a week. But then I wasn't paying much attention because she ended up cutting them all apart
Oh no.
and starting over. But this time they weren't bracelets, they were ring size. They were smaller. Tried her best to do some more. She will do something like that over and over and over. And that's what makes me think there's a link for her.
There very well could be. Yeah. And we can chat
Yeah.
more after a little bit about that. So Cassie, is born. It's like it must have been a whirlwind of emotions. You kind of talked about it, what it was like when she was born, that they put her on your shoulder, that unlike your other kids, which is so fantastic because they knew they were going to have to take her away. I mean, the doctors obviously knew that she was going to be born with Down syndrome and she had the gastral blockage.
Atresia. Uh-huh.
Yeah, right. I couldn't think of the term. And so how do you feel the doctors handled her diagnosis and care and I guess treatment of her?
Well, I don't know. I think there was a lot of pity,
Mhm.
which I didn't really appreciate.
Mhm.
I wish they would just say, "Congratulations, she's a beautiful girl,"
Mhm.
and move on. But it was. I remember going to meet the surgeon, nice guy. He was the one that was going to do the surgery in her abdomen to connect things properly. And I remember getting out of another one of those memories that just is right there on the edge. You can see it.
Mhm.
Chuck and I got out of the elevator, and there was another mom coming into the elevator and had a child with Down syndrome. This child had a lot of other issues too, and I just broke into tears.
Mhm.
But as we met the surgeon, he said, "I've never had another mom come with questions like yours." Kind of flattered by that.
Mhm.
But then he got out his textbook and he said, "Okay, this is what it could be here. This," and he showed me. "And what we'll do here is we'll do this." Then he turned the page, "Or it could be this, but we won't know till we get in there." And then he turned the page and he said, "And this, my associate and I have never seen this particular issue." And that's where there's an actual space between the duodenal, duodenal, whatever you would say. But there's a connection that hasn't happened. And so we have to get in there and reconnect that. And he said that's probably not what it is because neither one of us have seen it. Well, it turns out that was what it is.
Oh my God.
And he called his associate and said, "You're not going to believe this. We have this condition. Get in here. We've got to both see it." So they both worked on her, which made me feel kind of good that both were there. So I learned that after the fact, of course, but I think they treated me with as much care as they could at the time. I don't
Mhm.
ever remember anyone being, uncaring. They
Mhm.
cared, but they missed that one little facet of the congratulations. Let's
Mhm.
celebrate. You now have a baby girl. Congratulations. So happy for you. Da, da, da.
Yeah.
That was missing. That was missing.
Mhm.
But I think they did in our case, they did the best job that they could,
Good. Yeah.
what they had at the time. You follow
Mhm.
me?
Mm.
So I think we've learned a lot
Mhm.
since then, and hopefully there's a lot of people doing it differently now.
Well, that's good to hear that it wasn't overly negative. That
No,
I mean, I do
wasn't
hear
over.
that often that there's the congratulations, and like you said, you feel that there was some pity, because
Yes.
nobody wants to feel that when they've just
No.
given birth to a beautiful baby, you know, who's rocking an extra chromosome. But yeah, and I'm sure back then, because it's so different now, we're trying to bring forth our kids and share them and show people our kids because for so long they were hidden away.
Right.
I don't ever remember a child in school with Down syndrome ever. And that's like, and they obviously were there, but definitely
Right.
not in my school or anybody else's school that I knew of.
Yeah.
And before we were chatting back and forth, you had mentioned that you're about being a stubborn mom, which I think I'm kind of
Yeah.
like that too. And when it came to the breastfeeding, And I
Yeah.
loved hearing that because especially back then, because even now I hear that a lot of doctors are not in favor of it. They don't feel that our kids are capable of it. But what
Wrong.
motivated you to push through those challenges, especially when some medical professionals don't always encourage breastfeeding for babies with Down syndrome?
Right. Right. I remember the frustration of my having a letdown and the milk just falling into her little mouth and she didn't know what to do with it. And I was so frustrated by that. I
Mhm.
remember, well, first of all, I thankfully had 3 successful attempts at breastfeeding and winning. That
Awesome.
helped. If she had
Mhm.
been my first, I don't know. But I had already had hours and hours, an average, well, probably 3 years of experience already.
Yeah.
So I felt good about that. And I was determined, Mary. I was so determined. I thought, okay, she was in the hospital healing from her surgery. And it was probably around day 10 or 12. And I said, okay, I'm spending the night tonight. And by tomorrow morning, I will have taught her. I was determined. So they said, okay, Mrs. Middlesetter, you can sleep in this area right here and we'll see you in the morning. So I stayed all night. I did my best. I didn't get a wink of sleep.
Mhm.
It was awful. And by morning, she had lost 5 grams.
Oh, no.
So they said, Mrs. Middlesetter, she's spending more calories trying than she is actually getting from you. And that was a defeat to me.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh no, what am I doing? And I would sit there. I had her in the rocker and I was rocking and I was just crying that next morning. And the nurse would just walk, they would walk by and kind of ignore me. They didn't know what to do. But I had one nurse pull a chair up and she sat down. And that's the one that told me, don't look too far in the future
Mhm.
because it can overwhelm you. Just think about now. And she said, what we'd like to do is fortify your milk. Well, that was offensive to me. I thought, my milk does not need fortification. So she said, we just want to add this packet because if we can get some meat on her bones, and she was like, I don't know, 8 pounds and something. No, I'm sorry. She was 7 something. But at first was against it. I said,
Mhm.
no, it's not need. I will pump. She will get my milk. But then they talked me into it. And I understood why. And the doctor said also that if we can get her to gain some weight, then you can take her home. And so I accepted it. That's what we did. And then around day 21, I was sitting there early in the morning and I was there for rounds. And the doctor came in and he was talking near me. I could hear what he was saying to the nurse. And he said, why is this baby still here? And the nurse said, well, because we're trying to get her to weigh X amount. And she has lost a little bit since she's been here. And he said, do you think that the baby will be okay with mom? Is mom capable? And blah, blah, blah. And she said, absolutely, 100%. So there you go. She was on my side and she stuck up for me. And then the doctor looked at me and he said, let's take your baby home. And I
Aw.
cried, of course, I can't help it. And I got to take her home on the 21st day, I believe it was. And that was a surprise. Nobody expected it. The boys came home from school that day and she's here, she's here, she's
Aw.
here. Real, it was a great memory.
That's
Um,
wonderful.
yeah,
And
but I was stubborn. I was going to teach her, and I pumped around the clock. And I would teach her. I would try to do a training session with her around 7:30 in the evening. Now I don't know why, but I remember that. But once a day, not every time, but once a day, I would try to teach her. And at 3 months old, I'm happy to say that she learned how to nurse, and I could stop pumping. But I was a diligent mama, and I pumped and gave her my milk with a preemie nipple. That was the only one that she could handle. She did not have strength in her mouth. She
Mhm.
was a very, they call floppy baby.
Mhm.
So she was very loosey goosey, I call it.
Mhm.
And I said, nobody's going to tell me that I have to stop. Once we start, she will be the one that determines when to wean. And 18 months was how much we got
Wow.
nursing. So a very successful nurser once she got taken off. She took off.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was never overly successful, and I did fortify my milk too. And Ainsley was quite
Good.
a chunky little baby. I mean, she was 9'1" when she was born, which for a baby with Down syndrome was quite big. I was definitely
Yeah.
not expecting a big baby like that. And I had a C-section as well. I was actually grateful for that after I realized how much she weighed. And then, and
Yeah.
I fortified my breast milk as well. And she was like a little chunk. And she did a little
Uh-huh.
bit, but I really wished I I know now there's people out there who will help. Julia's Way is an organization that helps moms with kids with Down syndrome specifically to breastfeed. And I wish I had, I don't think they were in existence when Ainsley was born, or had something like that. I mean, I'd seen lots of doctors and a lactation consultant and a breastfeeding doctor, but no one ever watched me breastfeed her. I'm going, isn't that the point? And
Yeah.
it would have made life a whole lot easier at the time, if I could breastfeed, when you're out and about and stuff like that. But yeah, good for you, because I just hear it even now,
I know.
doctors just kind of poo-poo it and say, oh, they can't breastfeed because, the low tone, because feeding
I
is
believe they
hard.
think it's too much trouble.
Yeah.
It's not too much trouble.
Yeah.
Hang in there. It's not too much trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you did it yourself. That's fantastic. And I think I always, when I hear about new parents, like if they had a prenatal diagnosis or even birth, who want to breastfeed, I totally try to encourage them, and because it can
Good.
be done. It just
Yeah.
takes a little bit of patience, like 3 months. And, a lot of people don't want to wait that like the time, but, if you can persevere, most of our kids will get it.
Yeah.
Just have to
Yeah.
work through it. So that's wonderful. And during those 11 days that you had between finding out that Cassie was going to be born with Down syndrome and then giving birth to her, what was that time like for you? Was it anxious, sad? Like,
Oh, I mean, there was some sadness. I went through some depression after she was born, because you do grieve the child you thought you were going to have. There is that.
mhm,
And it's almost as though that child, the one I thought we'd go, take, I don't know, dancing and go shopping. Well, Cassie and I do some of those things, but the communication is not there. So the child that I thought I would have, I grieved that child, which is, I think, important. You have to do some of that.
mhm,
But I think those 11 days were, I had as much quiet time as I could get. Colin was only a year and a couple months. He was young, but I was, trying to read and just take time to really consider. But I self-isolate some. I know that's not good, but it's hard to remember now, but I probably did, go off into the room and give me this time. I need some time just to be by myself. And I would pray. I would read scripture. It was a hard time. And I remember being on Zoloft for a while when she was a little older, because I just wasn't coming out of it. I was it was a lull for me. But it was only for a short time, if I remember right. But I did. I went through some depression.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess, I mean, it's a pretty short turnaround, 11 days, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think for yourself, it was better to get your somewhat prenatal diagnosis as opposed to a birth diagnosis?
I've thought a lot about this. I think the way I found out was the very best way for me. I think the Lord knew that I needed to find out that way. I have often thought about the sweet mamas that have found out 4 hours later after they've given birth. And I felt my heart just goes out to them, because to me, that would be harder. But again, I just really feel like the way I found out, I didn't find out too early. Like I said, at 20 weeks,
Yeah.
I was able to, just go about my pregnancy and not completely, just not realizing yet what really was down the pike. But I feel like I found out at the right time. That's just the way I feel. I was thankful for the way it took me a while, but I was thankful for the way I found out later on too.
Almost every person I have ever asked has said pretty much the same thing. They're happy how they got, like, if they had a prenatal or birth diagnosis, they've all been happy with that. And many people say, yeah, I found out how I was supposed to find out. So it's interesting. I think I've only had 2 people ever who what they would have preferred differently to get how they got their diagnosis. So I always find that interesting to hear from people. And I think most people, for the same reasons like you. So I wouldn't work, in, a lot of people who had birth diagnosis, I know I wouldn't have done well, but everyone who had the birth diagnosis say, but I didn't have to worry my whole pregnancy. So yeah, it's always interesting to hear from people how, which they prefer. So that's
Right.
interesting.
Right.
So Cassie is 27 now, and I imagine she has taught you a lot over the years. What would you say is one of the biggest lessons she's taught you or brought into your life?
Patience. Hands down, gotta be patience because I, especially in my young married life, I was very impatient. I wanted things now. I wanted clean up your room now, that kind of thing. And I was raised by a very impatient father, to be honest. And so I got it from him, I'm sure. But I think Cassie has slowed me down,
Mm.
made me prepare. In other words, she doesn't do anything fast. So if it's time to go to church, I can't rush her,
Right.
but I can start earlier.
Yeah.
I can start earlier. And that has helped me immensely because I say, okay, we have to leave. I have to be at choir by 9:30. So if I leave by 9, I have to start her by 8. And if I don't, I'm in trouble.
Right.
I really do find that patience and preparedness have been key to helping me parent her. And what else is difficult is that she is 27. I'm trying very hard to realize she is an adult and yet does need a little parenting from time to time. But some people in the family, my dad would be one, it doesn't understand. You just have to lay the law down, Cathy. You just have to. And I say, well, Dad, she is an adult, needs to be able to make some decisions on her own. But there's kind of a fine line to follow on that. Do my best, but I would say patience.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I would say that for myself as well. And I'm only 12 years in. So most definitely patience. Now, for a family who has just received a Down syndrome diagnosis, either prenatally or at birth, what advice or words of encouragement would you offer? And what do you wish someone had told you back then?
Well, we're going to jump right back on that word, congratulations. I think that's very important.
Mm-hmm.
There would be no pity in my face. I would be thrilled for her and the dad. And so I would say, congratulations. You are not going to believe all the wonderful things you're going to learn by being a parent of someone so special, whether it's a girl or boy, either one. But I would just say what I've said before to others, they're local, is if you need me, if you call me, I'm here. If you have any need for some advice, plug in to your local, folks that also have. Make sure you're involved in a good church. There are people there that could help you. But I would just want to be encouraging as far as that whole thing about not looking too far ahead, because that can bog us down and make us a little down in the dumps. Where will she go to school? Will she ever learn to drive? These are questions that I asked way too early. And so I would just want them to be, present in the moment.
Yeah.
And enjoy the now. And enjoy dressing her, put bows in her hair, that's what I enjoyed. And boy, if there would have been some type of a prize for that, because at the nursery, there was a new bow in her hair every day. So anyway, the nurses all commented about how Cassie was always dressed. So it was fun.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. And I do get comments even till today that, about how Ainsley's dressed, because it's always been important to me that her hair is nice and that, that she's dressed nicely, because I want people to know that she's cared for. And because I really don't like when I see, especially these people out in public where they have a terrible haircut or, the clothes don't fit, or they just, I can't speak for why that is for that person, but I've always tried to make that important for my daughter, and I do get lots of comments about her hair. I've learned to braid all different types of things, and like you always putting the bows in the hair and stuff like that, especially when she was younger. And Yeah, you're right. It's just that's
Yeah.
important. And I think it's important for our kids to be seen and to show
Yeah.
that they're loved and wanted. And
And she enjoys looking pretty at church.
Mhm.
You know, she enjoys having her hair fixed and looking nice. You can tell she just carries herself better. You know, she's happier. Yeah.
Yeah, Ainsley loves getting her hair done. It took forever when she was young to really even be able to wash her hair because there was a lot of like head sensitivity. Like she won't wear a hat to save her life.
Yeah.
Like occasionally she's worn one, but really like since the day she was born, like even the little baby caps they give you in the hospital, she managed to get that off. And she's never been a fan of hats or hoods or anything, but she'll tolerate getting her hair done, which I find really interesting. So I quite enjoy doing her hair and
Yeah.
making her look pretty,
Right.
because that's
Right.
what we want for our kids. So
No, we do.
that's wonderful. Well, Cathy, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and your journey with Cassie. It's really inspiring, especially for us that are, with the younger kids, because like, as I told you before we started, is I'm looking at all these parents who are ahead of me, who have paved the road for us. I'm so grateful and thankful for parents like you, to do that for us, to make it easier for us, and it's it's a reminder of the beauty and strength in our community. And I'm so grateful for your time and openness today.
Well, you're so welcome. And thank you again for having me and making this possible. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Can you imagine receiving a prenatal diagnosis just 11 days before your baby is born? I can only imagine how overwhelming that must have been. But Cathy didn't back down. Instead, she dove in headfirst, learning everything she could, long before the days of Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. That determination, it's truly inspiring. I absolutely loved chatting with Cathy. There's something so special about connecting with moms of older kids. I have so much respect and gratitude for these parents. They were the trailblazers. They fought to get our kids into schools, into inclusive classrooms, to be seen, heard, and valued. When Cassie was born, there was no online village, no late night scrolling through support groups. But just 5 weeks in, Cathy found another mom, someone who wanted to connect with her, that they could get each other. That's why finding your people matters so much. Our journeys can feel lonely, but we're not alone. And Cathy's determination didn't stop there. She was committed to breastfeeding Cassie, even when others said it might not be possible. But guess what? She did it. And let this be a reminder. Don't let anyone tell you what your child can't do. With support, patience, and a whole lot of love, our kiddos can do amazing things. I know Ainsley has taught me more about patience and grace than I ever thought possible. And I know so many of you feel the same. Thank you so much for listening to the T21Mom podcast. If you'd like to share your diagnosis story or something close to your heart, please reach out to me at T21Mom.com and leave me a message. I would love to hear from you. Truly, it's an honor to share these stories. And hey, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and maybe leave a review. It helps others in our community find this podcast and reminds them that they're not alone either. So keep on loving on your rockin' kiddos, and I'll see you next time. And remember, I love you, and I see you.